The air was thick with the scent of destruction as the massive dragon advanced toward the fleeing rankers. Its glowing blue patterns pulsed with energy, casting an eerie light over the battlefield. The top-ranked warriors, who had once boasted of their strength, now scrambled in terror, their confidence shattered. The sheer presence of the beast crushed any remnants of arrogance they had left. Among them, the Ice Princess desperately tried to rally her peers. She shouted, urging them to stand their ground and fight. If they, the strongest, ran away, who would protect the civilians? But her words fell on deaf ears. Fear had already taken hold of their hearts. One of the fleeing rankers, his voice trembling, cried out for help, his pleas echoing through the chaos. But before anyone could react, the dragon's massive jaw snapped shut around him. His scream was cut short as his body was torn in half, his remains swallowed whole. The horrific sight sent a new wave of terror through the rankers. The Ice Princess, frozen in place, felt her blood run cold. This wasn't just a mindless monster, it was a predator. It hunted not just to destroy, but to devour. She had read about Evas that fed on humans, but witnessing it firsthand was something else entirely. Before she could process her fear, the dragon's piercing gaze landed on her. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from its chest as it prepared to strike. Without warning, a long, grotesque, parasite-like appendage shot from the dragon's mouth, slithering through the air with terrifying speed. Panic set in. Her body screamed for her to move, but she was paralyzed, unable to react in time. Then, just as the creature was about to reach her, something unexpected happened. A figure dashed through the battlefield, moving faster than anyone could anticipate. The protagonist, gripping a large sack filled with dry leaves, leaped forward and flung its contents directly at the dragon's face. The sudden impact and cloud of debris caused the dragon to recoil for a moment, confused and agitated. Seizing the opportunity, he grabbed the Ice Princess, lifting her onto his back without hesitation. With every ounce of strength he had, he ran. His mind raced as he searched for a safe escape route. His eyes landed on a manhole cover near the edge of the battlefield. Reaching the manhole, he pried open the heavy metal cover and gestured toward the darkness below. He assured her that the sewers were a safer option. He had cleaned them before and knew their layout well. Without waiting for a response, he lowered her down first before following himself. The cover slammed shut above them, just as the dragon's parasite appendage struck where they had been standing moments ago. The underground tunnel was damp and smelled of stagnant water, but for now, it was their only refuge. As he carried her through the maze-like sewer system, the princess found herself lost in thought. Why would a mere janitor risk everything to save someone like her? He spoke with a steady voice, explaining that he had simply done what he could. One didn't need an alpha ability to help others. Her heart skipped a beat. His words were simple, yet profound. For years, she had been surrounded by people who judged worth by rank and strength. But here was someone who believed otherwise, who had risked everything despite having nothing to gain. A faint blush spread across her cheeks as she muttered her gratitude. He had saved her life, and for that, she owed him. Following the sewer's winding path, they finally emerged near the entrance of an underground shelter. A reinforced steel door stood before them, a beacon of safety in the chaos above. With relief in his voice, the protagonist pointed toward it. They had made it. But just as they approached, the heavy doors began to slide shut. Panic surged through him as he shouted for them to wait. He carried the princess in his arms, desperate to get her to safety. From inside, voices shouted back. The shelter was already at full capacity. The surrounding residents had rushed in, and there was simply no room for more. They were told to find another place. For a moment, despair threatened to take hold, but then a murmur ran through the crowd. Someone inside recognized the princess. Whispers spread like wildfire. She was Hyuga, the elite S-rank student. Almost immediately, the atmosphere changed. A voice called out to make room for her no matter what. The protagonist breathed a sigh of relief, thinking they had been saved. But as he stepped forward, still carrying her, a firm hand shoved him backward. He stumbled, barely keeping his balance, as another student sneered down at him. Recognition flashed in the boy's eyes as he pointed accusingly. He had seen him before. He was the unranked janitor from their school. Disgust dripped from his words as he declared that someone like him didn't belong in the shelter. There was no place for the weak, no space for someone who couldn't contribute. The protagonist was stunned. He had risked everything to get here, yet he was being turned away solely because of his lack of rank. The Ice Princess, still in his arms, immediately protested. She demanded that they let him in, explaining that he had saved her life. But the voices inside remained firm. There was no room for someone like him. Frustration filled her as she turned to him, her expression filled with guilt. If they truly had no space, then she would leave instead. He was the one who had saved her. He deserved safety more than anyone else. But before she could act, the ground trembled. A deep, earth-shaking rumble signaled the approach of something massive. The walls of the underground shelter vibrated, and dust fell from the ceiling. The crowd inside screamed. The strongest species was near. Fear overtook them, and without another word, they began closing the shelter doors. The princess gasped, realizing what was happening, but before she could react, she felt herself being pushed forward. The protagonist, with one final effort, shoved her inside just as the heavy steel doors slammed shut behind her. He remained on the outside. Silence stretched for a moment as he turned back toward the destruction above. The truth was now undeniable. Rank and abilities didn't define a person's worth. It wasn't about titles or power. It was about action. As the heavy steel doors slammed shut, sealing the shelter from the outside world, the protagonist was left standing alone in the cold, desolate ruins. He took a deep breath, his heartbeat steady, despite the terrifying reality before him. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through the air, sending shivers down his spine. Slowly, he turned around, only to find himself face to face with the monstrous dragon once more. Its massive body loomed over him, casting a shadow that stretched across the shattered ground. Its thick obsidian scales glistened under the dim light, while its enormous wings spread wide, ready to strike. Two piercing eyes locked onto him with an intelligence that sent a shudder of dread through his soul. Sharp, curved horns protruded from its skull, and its gaping maw, lined with razor-like fangs, dripped with the remains of its last victim. Yet, despite the overwhelming presence of death before him, the protagonist did not flinch. He stood his ground, gripping a rusted iron rod that he had picked up earlier. With a determined glare, he lunged forward, swinging the iron rod with all his might. The impact barely scratched the dragon's thick scales, but he did not stop. Blow after blow he struck, each attack carrying the weight of his conviction. Then, in an instant, everything ended. The dragon moved faster than he could react. Its jaws snapped shut around his body, slicing through flesh and bone effortlessly. Pain surged through him, but it was fleeting. His vision blurred as he felt himself being torn apart, his very existence being reduced to nothing. His body crumbled, scattered into pieces like dust in the wind. As the last remnants of his consciousness began to fade, regret clawed at his mind. His entire life, he had believed that actions determined a person's worth, that no matter how weak or powerless he was, he could still prove himself through effort. But now, as he faced the inevitable truth of his mortality, he realized something bitter. He had always wanted an alpha ability. No matter how much he tried to deny it, deep down, he had wished for power. Not for himself, but to stand up against those who had looked down on his mother. But just as the last flicker of his existence was about to disappear, something unexpected happened. A bright, ethereal screen appeared before his fading consciousness. Alpha Ability Activation Condition. Death has been met. A surge of energy unlike anything he had ever felt before coursed through what remained of him. His mind, which had been slipping into nothingness, was forcefully pulled back. A deep, resonating voice, neither human nor machine, spoke once more. Activating ability, Apex Predator, Black Hole. Suddenly, the sky trembled. A massive, swirling vortex materialized above the battlefield. Its edges shimmered with a gravitational force so intense that reality seemed to bend around it. The black hole, dark and infinite, pulsed with power. The dragon, sensing danger for the first time, roared in confusion. Its massive body twitched involuntarily as an invisible force began pulling at it. The monstrous beast that had devoured countless victims now found itself ensnared by something far greater. The system notification echoed again. Beginning target consumption. The black hole's pull intensified. The dragon's enormous frame convulsed as its flesh, scales, and even the very essence of its being were stripped away piece by piece. The consumption process began at a terrifying pace. Consumption rate, 20%. The once mighty beast thrashed in agony, trying desperately to resist, but it was futile. The vortex swallowed it whole, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. Consumption rate, 90%, 100%, and then silence. The vortex, having completed its purpose, began to contract, shrinking into itself until it condensed into a solid form, a crystal, black as the void yet shimmering with raw, pulsating energy. The air crackled with an unknown force as the crystal trembled, as if something inside was fighting to emerge. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the crystal cracked. A gust of wind exploded outward as fragments shattered, scattering like broken glass. The dust settled, revealing a figure standing amidst the remnants of the destruction. A faint blue aura radiated from his body, casting an eerie glow in the darkness. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with newfound vitality. His senses were sharper, his body felt stronger, more powerful than ever before. His mind reeled as he tried to process what had happened. He had been devoured by the strongest species, by an entity that no human could hope to defeat. Yet now, he was alive. And more importantly, he was starving. Before he could fully grasp the situation, the ethereal system screen flickered before his eyes once more. Successfully consumed the strongest species, Ava. A new prompt appeared. You can now use the strongest species' unique alpha ability. Would you like to activate it? Yes or no? As he stared at the glowing words, realization finally sank in. He had not just survived, he had evolved.